December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Over 2,400 Americans were killed. The Japanese aimed to cripple the U.S. fleet and neutralize the United States, buying time to conquer Manchuria and expand their sphere of influence in the Pacific. The skies over Pearl Harbor were filled with Japanese bombers and Japanese fighter planes. In less than 90 minutes, 300 U.S. aircraft and 19 warships lay damaged or destroyed.
To understand why this tragedy happened, we have to go back in time. In the 1930s, Japan was running out of natural resources and wanted to expand their sphere of influence in the Pacific. They turned their attention to China in the northeast region of Manchuria. A Japanese train blew up near the city of Mukden, and the Japanese used this to declare war on China. The U.S. initially opposed Japanese aggression and imperialism in the area, but an economically devastated country didn't view the region as having anything of great value that was worth going to war over, and therefore stayed out of the conflict. However, the Japanese were still worried that the U.S. would attack them. To remove this possible threat, the Japanese decided to bomb the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, crippling the U.S.'s ability to stop the Japanese expansion in the southern Pacific and removing the majority of the American fleet. However, that victory was short-lived. The attack on Pearl Harbor sparked the cries for war in the U.S. The day after the tragedy, on December 8, 1941, Congress voted to join the conflict, signifying a major event that might turn the tide of the war. The Japanese had awakened a sleeping giant.
The attack was a resounding tactical victory. Key American battleships were destroyed, and we suffered minimal losses.
Shortly after the U.S. declaration of war, on December 10, 1941, a small Japanese force invaded the island of Guam. This was a strategically important island for the Americans due to its location as a hub for aviation and its central location compared to other Pacific countries. American citizens used this invasion as another rallying cry for war. The turning point of the Pacific theater came on June 4, 1942, during the Battle of Midway. Japan aimed to eliminate U.S. influence in the Pacific completely by luring American carriers into a trap. However, U.S. intelligence had deciphered Japanese naval codes and were prepared. American forces strategically positioned ships around Midway and launched a counterattack. The battle resulted in the destruction of 4 Japanese carriers, a devastating blow to Japan's naval power and turning the tide of the war.
After the victory at Midway, the U.S. turned the tide of war in the Pacific, finally able to launch an offensive. Instead of engaging and defeating Japanese forces on every island they occupied, the U.S. employed the strategy of island hopping. By bypassing some of the heavily fortified Japanese garrisons and targeting strategic islands, those with airfields or ports, the U.S. was able to set up airfields and bomb nearby islands. Ultimately, the bypassed Japanese islands were isolated and deprived of supplies and resources, the U.S. effectively neutralizing them without direct combat.
We knew that after Midway, we wanted to take the fight to the enemy. Guadalcanal Canal is the first step. The Japanese are building an airfield there, Henderson Field, which will threaten our supply lines to Australia. We will hit the beaches and seize the airfield and use it against them. Once the field is operational, we will control the skies, supporting our ground troops and disrupting their supply lines.
Initially, the Marines took control of Henderson Field. However, the Japanese anticipated this attack. They were dug in and provided fierce resistance. For 6 long, grueling months, both sides suffered heavy losses. Finally, in January 1943, the U.S. regained control of the airstrip. Guadalcanal was the first successful example of island hopping, and the U.S. victory at Guadalcanal was pivotal. To achieve the Japanese goal, it was essential for Japan to control natural resources and control vital sea lanes. By defeating the Japanese in the Battle of Guadalcanal, the Allies were able to gain control of the Solomon Islands and threaten Japanese shipping, cutting off Japanese support and resources in the Southeast Asia.
We hope to draw the Allies into devastating battles onto our heavily defended strongholds, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. It will make the Allied invasion so costly that the Allies will be forced to reconsider their demands for unconditional surrender.
Iwo Jima is a strategically important volcanic island in the Pacific. It has strategic value due to its airfields. With its capture, it will expedite the bombing raids over Japan, which will reduce the losses for us.
Defending Iwo Jima is an honor. Troops, surrendering is a disgrace. We will fight until the end of our lives.
The battle devastated both sides, with only a few hundred Japanese soldiers captured alive. After 36 days of brutal fighting, over 6,800 Americans and nearly 21,000 Japanese soldiers were dead.
Just months later, Okinawa became the bloodiest battle in the Pacific. For 82 days, American forces clashed with the entrenched Japanese troops, enduring kamikaze attacks, artillery barrages, and torrential rain. However, the sacrifice was worth it. Claiming Okinawa would put them in a position to commence aerial raids over the cities of mainland Japan. The Allies hoped that this total war strategy would force the unconditional surrender of the Japanese.
The battle devastated both sides, with only a few hundred Japanese soldiers captured alive. After 36 days of brutal fighting, over 6,800 Americans and nearly 21,000 Japanese soldiers were